Hey guys, welcome to another great episode of the 10 Minutes with Boston Chris podcast. I am your host, Boston Chris. And today we have a huge treat for everybody out there as we talk to my friend and music industry legend, Clif Doyal. Tell you a little bit about Clif. Clif Doyal has pursued a diverse and multifaceted career in music and has reinvented himself many times over in his tireless pursuit of knowledge and experience in the industry he loves. Clif began his professional career as a drummer at the age of 12 and has performed throughout the United States, UK, and Saudi Arabia. In the 90s, he became a successful independent agent and worked closely with major record labels, including Warner Brothers, Sony, and Capitol, in the booking development of their new artists, and formed groundbreaking strategic partnerships with major booking agencies, including the Dale Morris agency William Morris, now WME, Monterey Artists, which is now Paradigm, and CAA. Simultaneously, he managed artists and secured recording and publishing deals with them. He has marketed his clients alongside brand names such as the Kennedy Center, the Smithsonian Institute, and the Wildhorse Saloon. He also developed successful publishing interests, placing music with artists and in film and television documentaries for PBS, the Travel Channel, and Academy Award nominated Rodeo Circus Films. As a publicist, Clif has secured coverage his clients in major regional and national media outlets. Doyle also produced the performance video Ray Price Live in Concert and has produced and or played drums on charted country, new age, and roots rock songs in the US and Europe for LiveWire, Shawna Russell, Coyote Zen, and Billy Adams. In addition to the work at his own companies, from 2009 to 2011, Doyle rose from publicist to EVP of digital delivery service AirPlay Direct, where he negotiated strategic partnerships with major music companies, including CD Baby. He also served as editor and contributing writer for its internet magazine, The Direct Buzz, where he conducted interviews with many of music's most influential artists, including Grace Potter, Emmylou Harris, Ray Stevens, Steve Vai, and others. He left AirPlay Direct in 2011 to focus exclusively on his company. In a career that spans several decades, Clif Doyal is a true leader in today's artist-driven market. We are so excited to pick his brain today. Hope you guys enjoy the episode. Show this episode some love with a like, a comment, and get into it. Guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the 10 Minutes with Boston Chris podcast. And man, we have a huge treat for everybody out there. As you may know, if you've been following my story for a long time, I've got a lot of interviews under my belt, and we stopped doing this for a good 6 years, 5 years. And my friendship with Clif Doyal, who is my guest today, has brought me back into interviewing. I don't know if you knew that, Clif, but
I didn't, but
I've
that's
been wanting to pick your brain for a really long time. So I said to
I
my
hope I
son,
hope you're not I
go
hope
ahead.
you're not disappointed.
Absolutely not. I know what we're gonna get. I'm ready for it. But my son's been trying to get me back into this for at least 2 years,
Oh,
and
good.
he would say, if you do this again, who's number one? And I said Clif Doyal, absolutely.
Wow, that's
So
amazing. Well, I'm honored, Chris.
well, I appreciate you being here. You're just one of the most compassionate human beings I've ever seen in the music business. And I just have a lot of respect for you. I wanted to get that out of the way first and foremost.
Well, I appreciate that. I have a lot of respect for you as well.
Thank you for
So
that.
I'm honored to be here.
Awesome. So, Cliff, let's start at the beginning. I know, you and I are up there a little bit in age. So, when we start talking about the good old days, when technology wasn't quite a thing anymore, or wasn't a thing. But anyway, I know that you claim a lot of different places as home. You can claim
Yes.
Oklahoma, you can claim Missouri, Tennessee, probably a little bit of Texas as well.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and where Cliff started.
So I was born in western Oklahoma, in Woodward, Oklahoma, near the Panhandle. My dad was a highway builder, construction man, and so they moved a lot. They lived in travel trailers, and um, I had three older sisters and a brother at that point. And um, my parents were living in Elk City. My dad was probably at that point was probably working on some part of Route 66 because I-40 didn't exist at that point. And he did
Wow.
later go on to work on building I-40 as well in Oklahoma, Missouri, Texas. But so I was born in Woodward, Oklahoma, and by the time I was just, a few months old, we had moved to Missouri, where my dad was from. And my mother was from Woodward. Her family's all from there. Um, and so they eventually settled on a farm in Hurley, Missouri, south of Springfield, when I was about 5. I think I was 5 when they moved there. I want to say it was 1962, 63, right in there. Um, and so I grew up on a dairy farm
Right.
in near Springfield, Hurley, Missouri, kind of between Springfield and Joplin.
Okay.
And so I grew up there and lived in that part of the country until I was in high school. And I started playing music. I don't know how you want me to talk about music now, or just kind of talk
Well,
about where
we'll
I've
we'll
lived.
get there. We'll get there. The
Okay.
first
So,
thing I really wanted to discuss, knowing that you grew up on a farm. My dad was a foster child who grew up on a farm, and he was essentially hired help, even though he was a foster kid. The reason why they fostered children was because they had a farm and they needed free labor. So,
right.
knowing how my dad was over the years and how much his work ethic was so apparent because of his time on a farm, I would love to hear you talk about how that experience as a child on a farm shaped your work ethic as an adult.
Well, because my dad worked away on road construction, my mother was in charge of the farm, and so it was me and her and my older sister, the youngest sister. The other two sisters had married and moved away, so it was just the three of us. And then largely, as time went on, it was just me and my brother and my mother. So it was really up to us
Right.
to get the work done. And we milked cows, um, which that's a 6 or 7 day a week job. You
Hmm.
can't just not milk them. You
Yeah,
have to
there's no
milk
off
them
time.
morning.
Yeah, no off
No,
time.
you have to milk them in the morning. You have to milk them at night. Now, my parents did give the cows Sunday to rest. They didn't milk on Sunday. But we also, so we had 50 head of milk herd, which were largely Holstein. And then we had about 50 head of beef cattle, which were largely Black Angus.
Hmm.
And we raised them for food. I mean, we raised them, we butchered them, we ate them, and that's just how it was.
Right.
Everything we had, except for our milk. My mother bought our milk that was pasteurized. We didn't drink milk from the tank, although she made things with it and cooked with it. But everything, so we were self-sustaining.
Hmm.
But the reality is even so, I was 5 and a half when I started working in the dairy barn. And I remember those days very well. And it was hard work. Yes, it was very hard work. But the reality of it is, if I wasn't up at 4:30 to bring the cows in, so the milking could largely be done by the time I caught the bus and went to school. And my mother would finish up the work and clean the barn because we had to go to school. And then when we get home, we had a little time and then process started over again. And only in the evenings, we'd stay till everything was done.
Right. And so, as an adult, like just to fast forward briefly, how was that experience? How did that shape your work ethic later on? Because the mentality is the work has to be done. I might as well do it myself, right?
Well, the work has to be done, And if the work doesn't get done, everything stops. No money gets made. Nothing happens. If the work stops on a farm, you can just expect that bad things are going to follow.
Exactly.
Animals are going to get sick. You can't afford that. So I mean, it's like we were all independent on each other as
Right.
this kind of little cottage industry. And I took great pride in the fact that I was able to help my mother and my brother and to our family to work. And then there were 3 of those years that we also raised cucumbers in the summer. So we'd finish milking, we'd go to the cucumber field, we'd finish with that, we'd take the cucumbers and keep them in the truck, and we'd milk, and then we'd take the cucumbers to the factory 30 miles away.
Wow.
And it was a nonstop. We'd get home at 10:30 at night, and we had to kind of eat on the run. And so you're talking about a kid. You're working from 4:30 in the morning until 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and then you're getting up the next day and
With
you're doing
school
it
mixed
again.
in, by the way, with school
With
mixed in, like, yeah.
with school mixed in the school months, yeah, it was. And in the summertime, we milked and raised cucumbers. It was just nonstop work.
Hmm.
And then we lived in a rural area, so when we had time off, my mother would take us into the little town, and we could play pinball. We got a little allowance every week. We could play pinball. We could get our soda or candy and go swim in the creek, and that was our life.
And so,
And
as we talk about your career going forward, and I can't wait to really get into the nuts and bolts of who you are, it's apparent to me as an outsider looking in at your life that farm experience really did shape the way you worked so many different, wearing so many different hats over the course of your life. It's apparent that farm life was part of that, and I'm really
it,
looking
it
forward to talk about that as well.
It did, and it taught me not only good work ethic, but it taught me structure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this happens at this time, no excuses. It's
Yeah,
kind of like
very
when the show.
regimented. Very regimented.
So it's kind of like in the music business, when it's time for the show goes on.
Hmm.
No excuses. Only if there's some extenuating circumstances that delays you getting on stage or whatever, you need to be present, willing, and ready to get up and deliver what you've been paid to do.
So let's
And I
get into
take
the
that
music at a
I take
very
that very I take that very seriously.
yeah, as well you should. The music business is a very regimented place, and if you don't abide by that regimency, then you're gonna falter more than you succeed for sure. I've seen that over and over again. Um, so I find this very interesting because born in Oklahoma, growing up in Missouri, we're not really talking about two known hotbeds for music, right? So you grow up, you're very young, you start a professional career of music at the age of 12. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
Um,
that's correct.
so, what got you started? I mean, you're a farm boy from Missouri. How did this happen? I got to hear it.
Well, the first thing that happened was I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan when I was 5. And I knew that minute that I wanted to do. I remember looking at the television and thinking, I want to do that. But I didn't realize at the time that I would become a drummer. I always wanted to be Paul McCartney. I mean, I fantasized about being Paul. I
Hey,
remember going to a church camp one year and telling people my name was Paul. So for the whole week that we were there, I was Paul. And so I was playing a role, and that was even before I was playing music. I just knew. So like, I had imaginary bands before I ever had a real band. I remember having like a group of popsicle sticks, and I had their band, what they were going to play, written on the stick, and then I would recruit my friends to be part of this imaginary band.
that's amazing.
And so when I was about 10 or 11, I had a middle school music teacher named Carmela Bartels. And she, saw me pounding on my desk all the time. And, I got reprimanded a lot. Way, way back in my grade school years, I got reprimanded a lot for making noise, banging on my desk. And so she said, "You need to play bongos in the Christmas program." So I did. I played Kumbaya,
Let's go.
and that's the first time I had ever been in front of an audience. And I remember how I was scared and excited and exhilarated all at once. And then when it was over, she said, "You did a great job. Now you need to get a drum set so you'll be available for the spring concert." And I remember saying, "Ma'am, I don't know how to play drums." She said, "You pound out rhythms on your desk all the time." She said, "You'll teach yourself how to play." Okay, well, I don't have a drum set. She said, "You'll get one." So I remember going home and I talked to my mother, and my mother knew, she knew that the die had been cast. She knew already. And so she sold a cow, told my dad the cow died,
Wow.
and bought me my first drum set.
That's amazing.
There's a country song in there somewhere.
Absolutely. Man, it's,
And so it kind of went like a friend of mine in school, Bobo Cooper. His father was a minister at a Pentecostal church. And so we had a little band. Initially, we were called Peace 2. And the whole point of that name was peace in America, peace in Vietnam. You have to think about the era. It was
mm,
1970, I think. And we thought we were little activists, I guess.
well, you
And,
were. You were.
and
That's
so, yeah, and so we wrote our own material, and we practiced in the church. And one day there was a group of three women. They were related. They were cousins, and I think there was two sisters and a cousin. No, I'm sorry. There were four of them. One played piano. Then there were three. They were sisters and cousins. Anyway, they were called the Gospelettes, and they heard me play, and they said, would you play drums for our band? And I'm like, well, sure. I really don't know much about gospel music, but so I played with them, and it was like rock and roll. I
yeah.
mean, it was the stuff that they were playing. This Pentecostal gospel was like, it had rock beats. It was like heavy rock and roll and lots of emotion and people crying, and it was like I'm like, wow, this is so cool.
Mm.
And I remember, getting paid. They passed the collection plate around, and we'd get a little pocket change. And I just thought that was so cool. And then a friend of mine, so we started doing, not only I was playing with them in Missouri, Kansas, Arkansas, kind of in that four-state area where I grew up. And then our little band, which was really a duo, we eventually added another player, but we were a duo, and so we played everywhere we could. We played at school functions, we'd play little private parties. My mom would throw parties at our house, and we'd invite people, and we'd play, and we thought we were just rock stars. I
Mm.
mean, and so um, I moved to a bigger town. The year that I was 13, I moved to Aurora, Missouri, and a friend of mine in school one day said, "My sister has broke her arm. Would you come play drums for our band?" And
You
I
didn't.
said, "Where?"
You didn't break her arm, did you, Cliff? You didn't do that.
No, but I did know her. And he told me, I said, "Where is this at?" And he said, "At Nick's Caravan West." And I went, "Nick's Caravan West?" I mean, it was this big, huge, it used to be an old chicken house, and it seated like 2,000 people. And
Wow.
like Hank Jr. played there, and all
Wow.
these stars played there that were traveling. And I just thought I thought that was my big break. So I went and played, and everybody in the band was an adult except for one of the singers. He was a nephew to the man that owned the club, and he was, I think, 13 at the time. We were about the same age, but everybody else were adults. And so these are all phenomenal players. And I remember the girl, she came the first night I played, and I got down off stage, and I said, "What do you think, Petey?" And she said, "You play too much." She said, "Think sewing machine. Think just keeping a groove, a constant solid groove, so they can follow along with that." And I went,
Mm.
"Okay." So I did that, and then I figured how to put my own little, because I was a rocker. I loved rock music. And so I would put little fills in, like maybe Russ Kunkel would do in the Carly Simon song, or something like that, where it'd be big, loud tom riffs, and they'd kind of look around at me and they're like, wow, that's cool. I like that. And so I was kind of teaching them a new way to think about traditional country music, and I was getting to play, and get paid.
Yeah.
And my mother would haul me to the gig with my drums, and she would sit there all night long and get hit on by guys, and she'd dance once in a while with them if they were sober, but she'd get hit on. She was a beautiful young blonde and just gorgeous, and she would sit there all night long and get hit on, and so her son could follow his dream.
So I've interviewed some drummers over the years, and I always hear the story about, man, I was too much. I was too much at first, and somebody came along and reined me in, and somebody, I don't remember which one it was, quoted as on my show. He said, somebody taught me and told me that they put the drums in the back for a reason, and stop trying to move the drums to the front of the stage. And so, what I've always, every time I hear a drummer say I was too much, I always go back to that quote, because it's so true. The drums are always in the back. They're always in the
Yep,
back.
they're always in the back. So,
So
and of course, I wanted to be out front,
yeah, yep. And you
but
ended up there in your own way, and we'll get there.
yeah, so that is how it started. I started playing professionally, and that's how it all came to be.
So how much do you think? So first of all, the story, if we're updating everybody at home, so far involves a sold cow and a broken arm. So just so we're staying up to date with everybody out there who might be taking notes, sold cow, broken arm. So how much did your early musicianship, those early years, say, before you were even an adult, how much did that shape your eye and ear for talent later on, do you think?
Well, it taught me a great deal, and it shaped me a great deal, because I was so blessed that in the very beginning of my career, and I'll stick with the country, that live side, because my gospel career was fairly short lived. I have worked with gospel artists in my adult life, but in my youth, my gospel career was fairly short. And but my career as a professional musician in a nightclub, playing with a group that was playing country music and rockabilly and early rock and roll, um, I was playing with adults. Like the guitar player in the band, he had been a house guitar player for um, the Ozark Jubilee. And the Ozark Jubilee was the forerunner of the Grand Ole Opry.
Wow.
And there were a lot of regional Opries back in those days, like the Louisiana Hayride was another one. Um,
I believe Joplin
the
had one, didn't they?
I'm sorry,
Didn't Joplin have a local Opry?
I don't remember Joplin having an Opry,
Okay.
but
Hmm.
but Springfield did,
Okay.
and again, it was like you know, Red Foley's. It was Red Foley, and
Yeah.
Red Foley really was outside of Nashville. There wasn't really much of a music industry in the Midwest except for Springfield, and Springfield had Red Foley and the Ozark Jubilee, and um, Little Miss Dynamite, Brenda Lee. She launched her career there. She lived, I think, in Mississippi, and her
Mm.
parents would drive her to Springfield to be a part of that show. Well, a lot of things sprung out from that. There was a publisher that was based in Springfield named Cy Simon,
Mhm.
and his son Scott Simon went on to be a famous Nashville music business person. But Cy had a major publishing company in Springfield, and one of his writers was a guy named Wayne Carson. And Wayne wrote hit songs. Well, he wrote "The Letter" for the Box Tops,
Oh man, great
which went
song.
on to be which went on to be covered by everybody and their
Yeah.
dog, from
Hmm.
Joe Cocker and on and on. And so I knew then that I was connected into a music vibe and thing that happens in the Ozarks that you can't find hardly anywhere else around it.
Hmm.
And so there was a music scene there. And now the Ozark Jubilee was long gone, but the people that I was working with, pretty much all of them had played with national artists, had been to bigger levels of the business, and I was competing. I was right there with them. But what it taught me was, I guess right off the bat, I was lucky to just fall into greatness. I guess
Right.
really to, you know, I didn't pick those people; they picked me, and thank God they did.
Yeah, and
But
just to update our listeners and viewers out there, if you don't know who Red Foley is and was, Red Foley was one of the most, in my opinion, influential people
yeah,
when it comes to country music. He influenced Hank Sr. He influenced Patsy Cline. I mean, before all of these giant stars came along in the 50s and 60s, there was Red Foley. And
yes.
so just letting people know, um, Cliff is talking about Red Foley, but I want people, if you are interested, to definitely look up Red. You will be highly, highly influenced yourself, I think.
Well, he was a legend, and his
Yeah,
show, the Ozark Jubilee, was recorded and broadcast on national television.
right.
So Springfield, Missouri had a national television show that featured country artists, and it was kind of like it was a jamboree. It was a little bit of Ed Sullivan meets the Grand Ole Opry,
Hmm.
and many everybody that was anybody in that era played that show.
Hmm.
The people you've mentioned and others.
Yeah, and just a hugely influential person. I don't think Red Foley gets enough credit
He
nowadays.
doesn't. He
Yeah.
doesn't.
Well, just
He's
what
almost
a that
he's almost a footnote, and
right.
it's really a shame because he was really instrumental in so many careers.
Mm,
Like again, Brenda Lee,
yeah.
um, Ronnie Self. Ronnie was an early rockabilly artist from Springfield. I actually played in Ronnie in the very end of Ronnie's life. I played in a band with his sister Dina. But Ronnie was an early rockabilly artist that was signed to at that time I think it was Columbia Records. Um, but he wrote Brenda Lee's first national number one song, "I'm Sorry,"
Hmm.
um,
Yep.
and it was because he was based there. He was working with Cy. He was connected to Red Foley. It's like that's how it was when they needed songs. They went to Cy, and Cy had Ronnie, and the rest is history.
Well, this is a very good example why I do these kind of interviews, is because I love to be educated, and I appreciate you educating me on Missouri music. I did not know any of this, so very interesting stuff. I knew of Red Foley, obviously. I mean, I'm a songwriter nerd, so I mean, you have to know who Red Foley is if you're into songwriters like I am. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I know as a musician, you ended up booking for your bands, and a major thoroughfare, I guess is a good word for it, for you to go from your professional musicianship to being a professional behind the scenes music guy was the booking for the original band. So how did that all come about? You're getting into the booking side of things with your band.
Well, with my own groups, once I started, you know, well, I mean, most of the stuff I did in my early career was all house band stuff,
Mm-hmm.
where you're sitting down in a club and you're playing so many nights a week, so many sets a night, and you're playing cover music and you're throwing some original music in, but you're largely in the same place all the time.
Essentially, a residency is what they would call it
Residency,
nowadays.
what they
Yeah.
would call it now. It was a house band situation, is what they called it then, but it'd be like a residency. And once I started traveling, I found that most of the agents that I worked for wouldn't necessarily be very straightforward and upfront with me
What a shocker!
about, huh?
I said, what a shocker!
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they would kinda tell me what I wanted to know, what I
Mm.
wanted to hear,
Yep.
as far as like, "Oh, it's a great venue, and it's oh, yeah, they've got a band house, they've got PA, they've got this, they've got that," and then you get there and it's nothing,
Hmm.
nothing like what you were told, and so I learned really early on to advance a date, like, don't just take the agent's word for it, call the club owner, get him on the phone or her, or the manager, and try to sort out as much as you can before you get to the gig. So I learned that. But then after working with agents that weren't really that good, I went, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it myself.
Hmm.
And so at that time, I had gotten to the point where I was not just the drummer, but I was the band manager, as it were. And we had, started playing in a bigger area. We played, at that time, I was playing in a rock band called Dice. We were based in Joplin, and Joplin is a really cool music city. Don't get
Hmm.
me wrong. I went to college in Joplin, and there was a lot of really cool talent there. We had a local venue there, just across the line in Kansas, in Galena, Kansas. There was a big rock club called the Ranch, and everybody that was anybody in the rock world played that room. And I mean, everybody from Kansas to, Styx, Morningstar, uh, d- um, uh, Stevie Gaines, whose band Crawdad, he left that band and went straight to Leonard Skinner because his sister was in the band. So Joplin was a real hotbed of musicianship, and I was playing in a rock band again called Dice. We were playing the Ranch and playing all the big venues, and we were an all original band. We did some cover music, but not a lot. We did like Rush, Styx, Kansas, that kind of thing, and we moved to St. Louis, and I had a really bad experience when that band ended. And I said I was never going to put my career in anybody else's hand again, and I
Wow.
didn't. I eventually bought a van, bought a PA, owned the lights, booked the shows, and started booking a little circuit of rooms after that band broke up. And then I moved to Oklahoma. My dad called me one day. He's like, "Son, I've seen an ad in the paper. They need a drummer 6 nights a week." Well, the oil boom was going on, and I was temporarily not working, and I'd really kind of hit a wall. I'd not had trouble finding work, and all of a sudden I couldn't find work. And so that call was just, man, the timing couldn't have been better.
Mm.
And so I moved to Yukon, Oklahoma, right outside of Oklahoma City, just to the west. That's where Garth is from.
Right.
And so I established myself, and I went worked this residency for about a year and a half, and then we started working in the city in Oklahoma City, and then I started booking us regionally all around the region, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Kansas. Uh, but I digress. There's an important thing that happened before all of this happened that I need to tell you, and that is going back to where I went to high school in Aurora, Missouri. When my father took a job in Saudi Arabia, my mother went and I went. And it was a road construction job.
Wow.
And the assistant for our company was a British woman, and her husband was in the British Aircraft Corporation. We lived in Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And she said, there's a band whose members are all from Scotland and Wales and England, and they play in the capital city in Dhahran, which we lived in Al Khobar. And then Saudi Arabia was like a desert kingdom, a Bedouin kingdom. It looked like literally once you went outside of the city limits, you're in the empty quarter, the second largest desert in the world. And I never dreamed I would meet a band living there.
That's amazing.
But she told me about them. She said, "Come out to the club. They play on the weekend." I went, "There's a club? Where?" And she said, "It's inside Dhahran." And Dhahran is a city built by Aramco, a big oil company in the 40s. And it was like an American city, probably 150, 200,000 people. shopping centers, malls, and this big outdoor cabana type venue that had kind of a roofed area that went around it, so it was somewhat you could get out of the sun.
Kind of
And
like
then
an
they had this,
amphitheater, kind of like an
yeah,
amphitheater kind of thing.
it was totally enclosed.
Okay.
And then they had this huge stage and this 7-piece band um, that went by the name Badge. That was a song by Eric Clapton.
Yeah. So
And this
talent
band
just finds you, man. Just
and
somehow.
this band played everything. I mean, they played Sam and Dave. They played all kinds of R&B. They played Cream and Clapton and all of this really cool 60s music that I grew up on. I knew this music. I mean,
Hmm.
I knew I belonged there. And so I got up and I got to meet the band, and the drummer is telling me, he's like, I said, where are you from? And he said, Oklahoma. And I said, wow, I was born in
Wow.
Oklahoma.
No way.
And he said, well, I'm leaving and going back there shortly. And up in a couple of weeks, I'll be gone and they're going to need a drummer. You should apply. And he said, why don't you get up and play, get up and sit in with us? And I did. And they hired me.
Wow.
And I'm 16 and playing in a band in
Golly,
Saudi
in
Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, of all places. What?
It was wild. And so again, I had moved to I when I left Saudi Arabia, it was because I couldn't get into a high school. Like at that time, Saudi Arabia had schools for Saudi nationals, but they didn't have high schools for American citizens. Like
Mm,
you had to go out of country.
right.
You had to either go to Switzerland, you had to go to Bahrain or somewhere else, and I couldn't get in a school. And so I wanted to finish high school, and so I moved from there to Dallas, Texas, and went my last 2 years of high school in 1 year, going to night school and working a day job,
Yeah.
either at construction or working in a big truck stop. And for that year, I didn't play music. I worked a day job and focused on going to school at night so I could get my high school diploma, and I did.
But ultimately, the goal that entire year is I need to get this out of the way so that I can get back to my art.
Yeah.
I bet.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then when I graduated, I didn't live in Dallas a very long time, maybe 8 months after I graduated, and I moved back to Missouri, and that's when I ended up going to college in Joplin, getting in the rock band and all of that, starting kind of my career being again more of a band leader and not a
Hmm.
sideman.
So
But
eventually,
I had to inject Saudi Arabia and Dallas in there because all that happened before I moved to Joplin.
what a great story, first of all. It's funny how you want to be Paul McCartney, you end up in a band with all these guys from the UK. I mean, what? I mean, what are the chances of that, right? Especially in Saudi Arabia, of all places.
Of all places,
Yeah,
you
it's
just
like my
wouldn't think
first
of it.
wife. Like, she was from Texas, I was from Massachusetts. We met in Virginia. Like, what are the chances, right?
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. The things that stories will remind people of, right? But
Yeah.
anyway, at some point, you're booking for your own bands, and you're extremely successful at it, and this catches the eye of other artists, of course, because they want to be booked as well. So when they see, oh man, this is band over here that's always busy. What's their secret? And they find out about Clif Doyal. He's like this booking extraordinaire. So now all of a sudden, you start booking a bunch of other bands as well, right?
Yeah, I started working with well, by the time I was done, before I actually launched an official booking agency, I think I was working with about 10 bands.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't charging them anything. I was just opening doors and helping them get into the circuit that I had built up, which was all over Oklahoma, North Texas, southern Kansas, Southwest Missouri, just in that area of the country in the Midwest. Um, and one of those bands that I was helping was Toby Keith.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being in a band, and was my band, and we were breaking up. and parting ways. And I already had a couple guys coming in to take care of the guys that were leaving. And I remember the singer in the band, when we were done with our last show, he said, you ought to think about being a booking agent. You're helping all these acts. You should really think about being a booking agent. And I remember looking straight at him and going, now, Mike, what the hell would I want to do that for? I said, I've never worked with a good booking agent. They've all been kind of snaky. And I work for some of the biggest snaky ones out there that people that are listening may remember, and I won't name any names, but I remember thinking, how crazy is that? I have no interest in that. And I remember waking up the next morning. I remember standing in the bathroom, looking at the mirror, and just talking to myself almost and going, maybe it's not so far fetched. Maybe you can do this and do it right and be honest and be straightforward and do it with integrity and do it with honesty. And
And
I
compassion.
decided,
We talked about that
I
earlier. So
and the passion.
compassionate. Yeah, so
And
compassionate.
I decided that that was what I was going to do. And so in 1984, I launched a booking agency out of my bedroom in Norman, Oklahoma, called Clif Doyal Entertainment. And I remember I made my own logo out of this, little design things that you could buy, and it had a star where the I is in my name, and I got business cards made and put out my shingle, man, and started smiling and dialing.
Just an incredible transition in your life and something that served you well for sure. One thing I did want to talk to you about, because you have a unique perspective in this field, I think. You have booked 4 bands and you have been a talent buyer for venues as well. You've worn both of those hats over the course of your life. I'm curious which one you found to be easier.
Well, the talent buying is a little more straightforward because you're dealing with a venue and a talent buyer, and I'm going around to the national agencies. I started actually booking for national recording artists not long after I officially launched my booking agency, because I was getting calls from I started getting calls from people in Nashville and from venues going, we'd really like to book some acts. And it's funny you mentioned Gene Watson. Uh, Gene Watson and Paik McIntyre.
Wow.
Paik is Reba McIntyre's brother.
Yep.
He had a very short-lived record deal career, and the first 2 shows I booked was him, Paik McIntyre, and Gene Watson. And Gene Watson was as big a star as I had ever,
Yep.
known. And so to be able to put my name alongside his it was just so exciting.
Yep.
And so I grew from that. That was in Ada, Oklahoma, and I was playing almost all the clubs I was booking into originally with national acts. I was also playing those with my band. And so before long, the agents are calling me, and I worked with, well, over the course of my talent buying career, I worked with just about every national act that you can think of, including a few that are out there now. I think probably the newest artist that I booked while I was still a talent buyer was Rascal Flatts.
Wow.
But I enjoyed that end of the business, and I used to book about probably anywhere from 20 to 30 shows a year.
Mm.
And before I got done, I was talent buying for venues in Oklahoma, venues in Texas, venues in Missouri. It just grew kind of like the agency did. It just grew to where I was working. And I really enjoyed that because I would basically, I'd go to the major agents. I would see who they had available and what their asking price was and what the routing dates were. And then I would go to the venue and I would try to keep my eye on things that I felt like was going to break. So, for example, the first time I booked Travis Tritt, I had some insider information from the record label because they were on the same label as Little Texas. And the first show I booked for Travis Tritt, I bought way in advance, And the week his show played, his song was #1 on the radio.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. Just you have
And
to.
his price was 4 times as much as we paid for him.
Right.
And I
It's
did that
timing.
many times over. I would keep my eyes on acts and I would just bet on them and go, this act is going to break. This act is going to break. You need to get on board now and buy this act. And almost always I was right about it.
So as you're growing within the booking field, you know, you're booking for bands, you're buying talent for venues. How much did your reputation as a booker for the bands help you in convincing other artists to play at a venue that you're buying talent for? Or did it at all?
You mean, did it affect the national agents I was buying talent
Yeah,
from?
did it help you get an
Yeah,
artist that maybe you wouldn't
yeah.
ordinarily have a shot at?
Yes, it did, because a lot of times when I would contact the buyer or something, they would say, "Hey, we've already heard your name." You know,
Hmm.
that I would contact the booking agent. We've already heard your name. Your act, Lance Griffith, for example, he's playing several venues where we book, and we hear your name associated with his, and then we know that you're working with Toby Keith or whatever. And yes, it did help me, because they knew that that they knew that I had a good reputation. They probably had talked to the buyer about me, or maybe not, but they knew that I knew what I was doing, and they respected the artist that I was working with, developing. And they would say, when we play in your market, we want this band to open the show, because we've heard great things about this band, and they will put butts in the seats as a support act for our national. And so, yes, it did help me. It cross-pollinated and helped me. Uh, Both helped the other.
Yeah, just an amazing perspective that you have over the business, and we're going to transition into even more sides of the business as you go from booking to management. And I can't imagine this was seamless at all, because this is just a completely different world between booking for an artist and managing the artist. There's a lot more involved, obviously. But what obstacles did you face in that transition when you're going from booking for somebody to becoming a full blown manager, essentially?
Well, I think I benefited from location,
Hmm.
because in Oklahoma, they had a great music scene in Oklahoma City, but there wasn't a real business infrastructure. There weren't established managers, there weren't established booking agents, or there were established booking agents, but they were no established managers. So uh, they didn't have anybody really to turn to,
Hmm.
and I saw them need help that I had experienced in my own. So, for example, like, let's just talk about from the live perspective. I knew what they were doing out there. So, and they knew, and sometimes I would end up going out and playing drums for acts that I was managing or booking,
Wow.
because they knew I was a drummer, and they call and they say, "Hey, our drummer can't make it this week. Can you come out and play with us for a week, or can you come play this weekend?" And so, I would go play for the acts that I would be managing or developing. But management really started out with my own groups back there in the Joplin days and the St. Louis days, and after that, um, where I was the band leader. I was the guy in charge. I collected the money. I booked the shows. I drove the van. I owned the lights, owned the PA. I had my own little cottage industry. So when it came time to become a manager, I already understood what it took to get an act on television, let's say for a radio interview.
Hmm.
So I had a handle on the PR side. I had taken creative business communications in college, so I knew how to write a press release that would get people's attention. I didn't know that was publicity. I didn't know that was what it was called.
Hmm.
Or I just knew that that was what I did, and I understood how to book shows, and I understood how to read people, so I could help them, build a team, or help them find musicians.
So there had to
You
be a
know,
lot of trial by error to know what's needed, right? Like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, this is something that needs to be done. So let me learn how to do it.
right. And so you just learn how to do it. It's like,
Right.
I always had a saying, Billy Block. I think, originated this. It's like when people would ask me, "What do you do?" Billy would say, "What do you need?"
Hmm.
And that was kind of always been me. There's never been anything that I felt like if I didn't know it, I was going to go learn it. If I didn't know, I would tell them, look, I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm going to find out. And I don't know how to do this, but we're going to do it
And
because I'm
it's
going
funny you
to.
say that because my son asked me when I told my son that you were coming on my show. He said, "What does he do?" And I answered him with, "What does he not do?" So very similar to what you just said. So funny that you said that. That's why I was chuckling. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, that's okay. No, I've always been blessed to. I was always curious. I wanted to know. I wanted to understand how publishing worked.
Mhm.
I wanted to understand why, how a record deal worked. I mean, so I made it my business to learn a little bit about every facet of what it took to get a band from the garage to a venue, a club, or wherever up to the next level. I mean, it's like, what does it take to get from this step to this step to this step? And there's no real formula cut and dried. I mean, there's certain things that you need to do, but there really isn't every artist is different too. There is no, oh, this is how we did it, so this is exactly how you should do it too.
Right. Yep. And it's funny because there's so many different branches to the music business. We're talking about booking and management. There's being an agent. There's distribution. There's publishing. There's so many different sides to it. It kind of reminds me of um, Tom Brady over the years has been asked why he was so successful. And he would say that the reason why he felt he was so good at what he did is because he didn't just learn his job. He learned everybody's job on the offense. And then he learned everybody's job on the defense, too. So he knew everybody's job better than they did. And that's what made him so successful. So it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about here, where you're kind of reaching out and trying to understand what everybody has to do and what each job's function is in somebody's career. It's interesting.
Yeah, I always made it, I always wanted to know as much, I didn't know what a song plugger was or
Hmm.
how the publishing world worked. So I dove in and learned it. And, I founded two publishing companies. And I ran, after I came to Nashville, I ran a publishing company for quite a few years. Matter of fact, one of my dear friends was asking me earlier if I'd thought about being a song plugger. And I said, I've done that.
Hmm. I
It was
mean,
very competitive.
what haven't you done, Cliff? I mean, let's be honest.
Well, I'm a curious soul,
Same,
Chris.
same.
I'm a curious soul, and I've worked a lot of times worked with artists where we didn't have money to go hire a staff, a team. So I go, okay, well, okay, I'm going to put my manager hat on for this task, and the next phone call, I'm going to put my booking agent hat on,
Hmm.
and the next phone call, I'm going to put my tour manager hat on, and the next phone call, I'm going to put on my label head hat. Um, and I ran an independent label for a decade.
And there's
Um,
so many arms I want to talk to you about. You mentioned PR, publicity, public relations, and so you have a public relations arm to your business as well.
yes.
Tell me about some of the challenges that you've faced as a publicist over the years.
Well, I think a lot of it is the amount of people that are out there now trying to get coverage is greater now than it's ever been before. I mean, when I started in the business, there was really only a couple of avenues that you could take to get established and break out in the business. And generally, it had to involve a major record label.
Hmm.
And at that point in time, the entry level to a major record label was, can you sing good? Because they didn't worry about who wrote the songs because they had staffs of writers that could write the song. They didn't worry about how you dressed or what you looked like because they had a group of people that would work with you on wardrobe and style and
That's
image
interesting,
and branding.
Mhm.
Now it's like the Wild West.
Right?
There's Spotify and app. I mean, anybody can record a song and upload it for distribution. Anybody can. Now, that has flooded the market with a lot of artists, and it's a double-edged sword. So right now there's less media outlets than I can recall since I started. I officially launched a I officially launched my publicity company quite by accident in 2004. And at that time, I was probably one of five independent publicists in Nashville. Now I would venture to say there's somewhere north of 50.
Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the challenges that I've faced has been, and then of course you're working with an outlet, let's just say Country Weekly, which is no longer there.
Right.
I had a great relationship with Larry Holden, who was when I first started my publicity company. Again, it was a total accident that happened, and I can tell you that story if you'd like. It
I would
was
love
not
to
take.
hear it. Absolutely. That's what we're here for.
Okay. So, in 2004, my wife and business partner of nearly 20 years was dying from breast cancer. She was very sick. Kathy was her name. And I have to give her almost total credit for me being where I am today. She believed in me without reservation. She supported me. She pushed me. She drove me to not only understand that I do what I do, but to understand that I was good at it and to accept that and not,
Own it.
oh, well, own it. She
Mm-hmm.
she really taught me to own it. But so she was dying. I had prayed to God to not make me a booking agent anymore. I was tired of that end of the business. I was burned out. I didn't want to do it anymore. The problem was I didn't ask God to replace it with something else. And so, in short order, I had no money coming in. I was not making money. I was going into debt with credit cards and just trying to borrow to stay ahead so I could take care of my wife. I couldn't work. She was in the hospital all the time. It was really a no win situation. And my longtime accountant and business manager, Clyde Bright, called me and he said, Cliff, I've got a young couple in my office, and she's a former Miss Kansas, and her husband's here with her, and they're looking for a booking agent for her. And I was just quiet for just a second, and I said, well, Clyde, then tell them to just keep on looking because I'm not going to do that anymore. And he said, now, Cliff, don't be so hasty. He said, your phone's not ringing, is it? I said, no, Clyde, it's not. He said, I know it's not. Uh, He said, hey, you're struggling. I said, yes. He said, take their call. They need everything. So the next day, the guy calls me, sure enough, and he said, hey, he introduced himself. My wife is, artist and former Miss Kansas, blah, blah, blah. And we need a good agent. And I said, nope, I'm not doing that anymore. Next. And he said, well, we need a publicist. And I said, I'm your guy. Just like that. I'd never been a
Oh
publicist
my
before.
gosh.
I mean, I had done it for my bands. I didn't really know. I didn't never really think about making a business out of it. But so they hired me, and it's a long story. But just long story short is I ended up just killing it, just crushing it. And this was all happening right in tandem with my wife dying. As a matter of
Wow.
fact, before my contract was up with the group, my wife had passed. And so, and that project led to another. And before long, I was handling publicity for an entire record label
Wow.
who fired one of the most well-known publicists in this town and hired me and gave me all of their account.
Wow. Well, that's amazing.
And so I had good friends that I had made friends with, like
Phone's
Larry
ringing
Holcomb.
again now, right?
My phone's ringing. I'm taking them and I'm parading them over to Country Weekly, which at that time was the hottest publication in the country world. I was getting them interviewed. I was getting their picture in the magazine, and suddenly, I've got more work than I'm turning away work. I've got so much work.
That's amazing. Um, Man, there's so much about Cliff that I respect, and one of the things that I really look up to you about, and I take a lot of pointers from you. You may not know this. This is my way of telling you. In my opinion, you are one of the most savvy social media people I've ever seen. And just the things that you say and do on social media, people can learn so much from that. I feel. I'm saying this, not Cliff, just so we're clear. But I want to know if you had any advice when it comes to social media and the way that it can be implemented in somebody's career and how it can be utilized as a tool for artists.
Well, I've developed it over time. I think the main thing that I've just been advised about is keep it real, and make your social media outlet match your brand. So, like, for an artist standpoint, it's like have something to say. And of course, with me, I'm kind of my own brand, so I'm not really focused on any one thing. And I don't always just talk about music on social media, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
I cover a lot of ground on there, and it's all stuff that I'm interested in, whether it's the earth and how we should be taking a better care of it, whether it's politics, just things that affect us as a society. And it could be music, it could be films, it could be you know anything that excites me at that moment. But I think the main thing is be true to who you are. Like, don't be a different person on social media than you are in real life. And that's what I try to do with my own. Thank you for the compliments. What I try to do with my own social media is that is me.
Mm-hmm.
That's not some made up something that there's somebody behind the curtain. When what you see in social media, that's me. Take it or leave it, and try to remain true to your brand. And that I think that I don't know that I was given that advice, but that's the advice that I give to artists. Is like it's something you have to stay on top of. Social media is something that when you're building a career, we didn't have social media when I was coming up in the business.
Right.
And so everything would be like with social media, it allows you essentially to be the author of your own story. Because a lot of people out there in the fan world, they hang on your every word. And you have a lot of power as artists.
And it opens up
And
personalization as well, which was
it
lost a lot of the time back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day, Pink Floyd did not want their pictures taken.
Right,
They
exactly.
wouldn't they wouldn't they wouldn't grant interviews. How long would that last now? It wouldn't, you
Well,
know.
think about Paul McCartney. How long did the world think that he had passed away? And they just
Exactly.
they just played that up. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so social media allows you. I always tell artists, you want your story told, tell your story.
Mm-hmm.
Use social media to tell your story so people can learn about you, and then find team members, whether it's manager, a publicist, a booking agent, someone that can help amplify that brand, put it in the right media outlets, put it in the right venues, put it in front of the right audience, make you determine what your brand is, and then you figure out where it works best, and your team members figure out where it works best, and then stay connected to the fans. Because listen, at the end of the day, they don't care whether you have a record deal or not. They don't care.
Right. If you're good, they're
Make
going to consume what you have. That's just the
They're
way it
going to
is.
consume what you have, and you're going to find your audience with or without a record label.
That's right. So, do you
Eh,
feel like, as someone who was in the business through the advent of social media, do you feel like it's better or worse for an artist now that social media is here?
I think it's a lot more work than it ever was as far as a career, because now you don't just write songs. record them, go out and perform them. No, that's just part of the deal.
Mm,
Now you need to take and spread the word about that through your social media, so people will go listen to your music, stream it, download it. Um, Club owners and talent buyers can take a look at what you're doing, and this business now acts come up through the ranks and get breaks not strictly because of what they sound like or whether they're a good singer or whether or not they have a great song. It takes all of that, but
mm.
also the record labels and the distributors and the booking agents, they're all looking at those numbers. They want to know that's the first question they have for you.
Yep.
What do your numbers look like? What are you on Instagram? What's your Facebook? What's your social media profile look like across the board? How many followers do you have? How many monthly listeners do you have on Spotify? Those are the things. I call it the moving train. Like a record label or a distributor or a major booking agency won't touch you unless you are a going concern already, unless you've created a moving train.
Hmm.
In other words, something's happening and a lot of people are digging it. Maybe we should take a look too.
And everything has to be linked together. The train analogy really works out well because, like, for me personally, I'm not a musician, but I have a brand as well. I'm on YouTube and Instagram and
Yeah.
Twitter and Twitch and Discord and all of these different places. And if everything is not linked together, the train doesn't move very well because you're always going to leave something behind. You have to make
Mhm.
sure you're linked, your brand is linked together. And if you're faltering on one, the train doesn't move quite as well. I love the analogy, it works very well.
Well, you're exactly right.
So I got to talk about fashion. You're in the fashion industry now. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
Cliff X Fashions. Tell me about it.
Well, Clif X Fashions was kind of founded out of um, I've worked with a lot of artists, especially female artists, who I've gotten involved in helping them develop their style or amplify their style. And some of that goes back to my mother. Again, my best friend, my largest supporter, my biggest fan was my mother. She was also she made all of our clothes. Like I had my first pair of store bought jeans when I asked her to buy me a pair of bell bottoms in 1971, I think, or 70. Um, she made all my clothes. She made all my shirts, my pants. I didn't have a store bought pair of blue jeans until I was 17. Can you imagine that?
Wow, amazing.
And so I would see something that I liked, like the latest from Carnaby Street in London, which was like the fashions that were the Who, Jimi Hendrix, the late period Beatles. Um, all of those groups got their clothes from this small area in London called Carnaby Street, and it was a collection of fashion designers and people who made everything from hats and belts, and even the people in San Francisco picked up on that. So, like a lot of the fashion that you saw Janis Joplin, for example, wear, or some of the Jefferson airplane, all of that fashion came from this really small area in central London. So I've always been I loved to dress, especially when I played rock music. We dressed very flamboyantly. It was the 70s, you know. I
Hmm.
mean, there were scarves and belts and hats and bell bottoms and cool, stuff with spangles and sparkles. And so I was always very fascinated by fashion. And so a few years ago, I work with well, this is a little bit of a diversion, but this is how I got into it. I work with the world's most famous mermaid. Her name is Hannah Fraser.
Yep.
Met Hannah working with her father, Andy Fraser, who was in the rock band Free,
Hmm.
and he
All
co-wrote
right
the
now.
song
All
"All
right
Right
now.
Now,"
Yep. I know
yeah,
Andy Fraser.
most played song in the history of rock and roll.
Yep.
Well, Andy had a song on the radio or television. I don't remember where we heard it. This is around 2009, and my wife and I heard it, and she's like, "You should give them a call and see if they need a publicist or if they need help." And I'm like, "I'm pretty sure Andy Fraser's probably got it covered." And she would not. give up. She was relentless. She said, call them. So I, finally went, okay, I'll call them. So sure enough, I tracked his assistant down, kind of acting manager, Girl Friday. Um, and 2 days later, I'm on the phone with Andy Fraser. And I couldn't believe, first of all, I'm talking with a guy that was my idol, one of my idols. I mean, I was a big fan of Free, and then Bad Company, Paul Rogers, and Simon Kirke, the drummer that was in both of those bands. Now, Andy did not go on to be in Bad Company, so he was in Free. He wrote and co-produced all the stuff. He was a teenager, but he had come up under the tutelage of like um, famous English bluesmen, and so he knew. Well, he was brilliant, and so sure enough, then they hired me to be his publicist, and he had a song out called "The Big One" and a really cool video that went along with it, and in the video it's got ocean scenes in it, and there's this mermaid swimming with this giant whale shark, and I went, "Oh my God, who is that woman?" And he said, "That's my daughter Hannah."
Wow.
And so I studied up on her, and sure enough, she's the most famous mermaid in the world.
Amazing.
And so after Andy passed away a few years ago, I was going to be in California in 2020. I was going to be in California for the NAMM convention, and I went out there with a client that I managed, and we had a lot of stuff going on for her, endorsement deals and different things. And we'd gone out to do some stuff with Gretsch Guitars because I'd just gotten her an endorsement with Gretsch, and we ended up meeting folks with Taylor. That resulted in an endorsement as well, and folks with Firk Guitars, and we got an endorsement from them. But while we were there, I made it a point to meet Hannah Fraser, and I asked her before I went out there, I said, "Who does your anything, booking, publicity, anything?" She's like, "I do it all myself." I said, "Well, you need some help, and I would love to help you." So I started working with Hannah, doing publicity and a little booking here and there when I could. Then the pandemic hit,
Mhm.
and I would watch her in these different clothing designs, and two names kept coming up in the in her presentations. One was a lady named Deborah Lindquist, and Deborah's based in the Los Angeles area, and another designer named Jessica. Um, um, Bear with me just a second. I'm my Jessica Hoff. So I reached out to Hannah, and I'm like, I've really been thinking for a while because several artists I'm working with, females, would love to wear some of these outfits by these designers. Are you good if I reach out directly to these designers and see if I can help them? And she's absolutely. So I connected with Jessica, and then I connected with Deborah, and they both agreed that I could pitch their material and kind of act as a brand manager, brand agent for them. And so I started that business during the pandemic. And I'm not killing a fat hog or anything like that. I'm not out there setting the world on fire as a fashion brand manager, but I'm having fun with it. And we've been able to, do some business together, and I'm thrilled with that.
So I think this is a good time to segue to something that I've always noticed about Clif Doyal. You've always been kind of a champion for the underdog. You've kind of always been known as somebody who takes an artist from maybe relative obscurity and then releases them out into the world, and then they blow up, and you know about this before anybody else. Um, what exactly tends to get you to gravitate towards an artist that is relatively unknown and then um, just happen to know?
I think the music comes first, then the performance, and I just know it when I hear it, and I know it when I see it. And I've been really blessed my whole life to know great talent, and I have been very blessed to work with many, many successful artists who weren't successful when we started, and I'm not trying to take credit for their success.
Hmm.
Don't get me wrong,
Right.
but I did play a part in their success, and I knew in my heart that they would be successful. And I've always had a knack, but I look for the song, the style, and even if the song is not quite right, if the quality of the talent is there, we can find songs, or I can connect them to other people to write the songs.
Hmm.
Uh, but the voice and the talent has to be there. The drive and determination has to be there. And you don't know that stuff by just hearing somebody. You have to meet them, you have to get to know them, you have to work with them a little
Right.
while. But I generally picked artists that had the talent first and the mindset and the live performance. And generally, if they had all that going, they had the mindset to go with it. And when I say the mindset, the in it to win it, I call it in it to win it. And you have to be in it to win it, or you're not going to make it.
Yeah. Perseverance.
Perseverance and knowing, seeing, I call it see it to be it. You
Love
have
it.
to see it to make it happen. If you don't see it, no one else is going to see it either.
It's funny you say that, man. Now that I'm doing this again, um, I feel like I've built a pretty decent sized base of former guests that I've had on the show. I mean, you talked about Alan Frazier and kind of being around one of your heroes. I've experienced that multiple times, and it is a huge blessing when you're able to talk to somebody you looked up to so much on an even keel. I love it, and but now that I'm in this again after such a hiatus of not doing it, it's almost like I'm starting over again, and it's hard to get your name back out there and rebuild that trust. So
Sure.
again, thank you for that, Cliff, for coming on here. Uh,
Oh, absolutely. I'm
just
honored.
reaching out to PR places and stuff like that. I'm just a little guy trying to create something from my studio storage shed, right, and trying to make it look good and sound good. And I'm an inquisitive guy, and I guess that's my talent. I know what to ask and when to ask it, I guess. But it's hard, man. It really is hard to get
Yeah.
your art out there and your talent out there, especially when you're the
Well,
little guy.
yeah, it's hard to get it out there, and then it's hard to. I think the main thing is that the driving principles that have always adhered to is like do good work, treat people the way you want to be treated, be totally transparent
Hmm.
in all your dealings.
Right.
Never sell something you can't deliver. Never make a promise you can't keep.
Yeah. I
So
think
don't make promises.
I think my struggle right now is trying to figure out the balance between perseverance and annoyance. Right?
Right. No, I get it. I get
Because
it.
man, I would rather get a no from somebody than be ghosted, right? Like
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
tell me no. I'm okay with that. I can handle no. No's an easy word for me to handle. I'm not going to accept it, but I can handle it. But
And
like,
no generally means not now in my
right,
world.
absolutely. No does not mean stop in my world, at least
No.
in trying to get somebody, to talk to. And by that grace, I would love to talk to Hannah, by the way, if you can make that happen. That would be amazing. She'd be
Well, we'll certainly give that a shot.
she would be fun to talk to. World's most famous mermaid. I can sell
Yeah,
that, Cliff.
she's an amazing talent, I tell you. And
Oh, I've been following along with your words about her for a while, so I agree. Yeah, 100%.
yeah, it was really cool. And again, I think that um I don't think anything happens by accident. I mean, I think that I think I've been blessed to be in the right place at the right time and be prepared. I call it when preparation meets opportunity. If
Mm,
if you have the opportunity come your way, you better be ready to grab it when it's there. and you better have the goods to back it up. And I guess that's how I've ended up working with, the acts that I've worked with that have gone on to be some of the biggest acts in the business. It just, I was not only in the right place at the right time, but I could deliver what they needed at that
Right.
moment.
And you put something out on your social media, I think yesterday or the day before, about really respecting the artist who gives kudos to the people behind the scenes. And
Yes.
I'm a big component or proponent of that on this show. I've always tried to talk to the people that don't get into the spotlight, the people that are behind the curtain, so to speak. I think that's just as important, if not more so, than the people who are in the spotlight. Because without those people behind the curtain, nothing happens in front of the curtain. So
Well,
there's a lot of interesting stuff behind the curtain.
yeah, and it really is. It for me, it becomes a partnership with the artist. I have their vested interest at heart. And they're doing the work, and we're working together, and we have goals and visions, and we're executing them. And you have to have a plan, but you also have to just know that there's a certain amount of things. If you're doing the right thing, people are going to notice, and they're going to, just like you reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd love to interview you." Well, I've sent artists to you, years ago, and I've followed you. I know who you are, and so when you reach out, it's that you made the effort. You know, you made the effort, and I'm like, wow. Well, not sure why he would want to talk to me, but yeah, I'd be happy to
Well,
talk. But
I
again, it's
think more than that too is, as an interviewer, you have to understand that it's really difficult to get somebody to talk to you without cultivating trust with that individual first.
of
Because
course,
essentially, for the hour and a half we talk or whatever, however long it is, your career is in my hands. So, like, I can sensationalize it. I can try to, throw you a fastball or instead of a curveball. There's a lot of things I can do, and an artist will know that. And so if I can't cultivate that trust beforehand, it's really difficult to get somebody to say yes. So,
sure.
and that's what I think that's what you mean by, just be true to who you are and people will notice. And that's hopefully what's going to happen is what I'm kind of leaning on. But yeah, I understand like the trust it takes to talk to somebody that you don't have trust for, and like, I mean, I feel like I have a pretty good body of work. We've got like 400 episodes now, so.
Yeah, you do. And again, that speaks for itself, and that opens doors for you. And it's just like me, I know a lot of people come my way because they've heard that I've, worked with Toby Keith, or they've heard that I was agent for Little Texas, or they've heard that I worked with Lone Star, or that I worked with Ricochet, or fill in the blank of artists I've worked. They know that I've worked with Kylie Morgan when she was a teenager.
It's really funny
They
because I didn't know any of this when I met you, Cliff. I believe we met through, I reached out to you for an interview with Jake Flint. I
yes,
believe that's
you're
how
right.
we met. And I had no idea who you were, or who you worked for. I just knew that you were working for Jake Flint, and I wanted to talk to Jake on the show. And oh
God
God,
rest.
God rest his soul. What an incredible individual, by the way. I listen to Jake at least once a week. So, yeah, that's how we met, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly.
I
And
think you're right. Yeah, it was around the time I was doing PR for Jake, and Jake was a great guy, and
yeah,
his loss was devastating, and probably one of the most daunting tasks I've ever had as a publicist. When he passed, that story went viral on social media before it went viral across the world, and literally, it was. Um, it was 4 weeks nonstop of dealing with the biggest media outlets in the world, from the Daily Mail to, fill in the blank, Fox, Variety, Billboard. I mean, everybody wanted to cover that story because he
hmm
died tragically on his wedding night.
yeah, and it saddens me as a fan of his and a friend of his that unfortunately, that's where he got known,
He
really,
became he
virally.
became more famous in death than he ever was in
Yeah,
life.
and he deserved so much more than that in life. He was just a phenomenal artist, great songwriter, um, extremely down to earth cat. I mean, it's. I understand the story, I understand it, but that's kind of the dark side, if
Right.
you will, of publicity, and I get it. But
Well,
Um,
again, you were talking about, how you knew me or didn't, and of course with me, it's like, yes, I've done all that. Yes, I was in on the launch of the Frontmen, who are out there killing it now. I
mhm.
managed Tim Rushlow, who had been the lead singer of Little Texas. Tim and I were focusing on big band. He told me about the Frontmen, and I
I
went, "Oh
remember
my
the
God,
big band. Yeah, I remember that stuff. Yeah.
yeah, it's Larry Stewart from Restless Heart, and it's Richie McDonald from Lone Star." Well, I was Lone Star's first national agent as well,
Mhm.
and so I knew Richie, and so it was just a natural thing. I'm like, "Man, this is a super group." And then I started working with them, and then after a couple years, everybody was in their own groups, and it just becomes so complicated to try to book and manage that. At one point, I told Tim, I'm like, "You need to go and just do the front man. There's not enough money here in the big band
Simplify
world.
it.
I
Yeah,
love
just try to
you,
simplify it.
brother, but you need to go with this and just run.
Mhm.
And you have my blessing." And so we didn't part under bad circumstances or anything. It's just I knew that they needed somebody that I couldn't be.
And they have a
And
great song out right now. Great, great song.
Eagles and Eagles. I
Yeah.
actually heard that when it
Yep.
was a work tape.
Yep.
Tim sent me that song a couple years ago. And again, it's like, yes, I've done all that stuff, but so what?
Mhm.
I've learned from it. Yes, I learned a lot. It put my name out there in a much bigger way than it ever could have without all that. But what am I done? My whole thing is, oh, well, that's great, but what have I done lately? I
Mhm.
guess that's what drives
No,
me.
you are definitely a very right now kind of guy. Definitely.
No, I'm not interested in resting on my
Yep.
laurels. Yeah, we can talk about it, and I'll tell you about all the things that I've done, but and that certainly prepared me for what I do now. But I'm more interested in about what's happening now.
Well, let's
Or
talk
what?
about what's happening now. Who are some of your clients? Let's talk about that right now. Who are you representing today?
Well, I'm working right now on a real interesting project that I'm anxious to see how it all unfolds. It's a singer-songwriter based here in Nashville named Clif Doyal, and Cliff is a traditional country singer, um, along the lines of some of the great country singers from the '90s. He has kind of a sound like that, and his fiddle player was in bands of mine before I came to Nashville. So I've known his fiddle player, his producer, now his manager, Willie Van Hook. Willie now is the fiddle player for Mark Chestnut.
Okay.
And so he called me. He's like, "Hey, I'm working with this young man named Clif Waddell. I need some help. There's only one person that I'm going to call, and that's you. And if you'll take the project, I won't make another call." And I said, "Well, send me the music." And he did. I loved it. And I went and heard him live. He could deliver it live, and he was a great guy. And so I signed on to be. It's a consultant job. We call it director of operations. But
Okay.
my goal is to get him established in Texas. He doesn't live there currently. We're working on that, remedying that, setting him up residency there and begin to book shows. And we're starting a awareness campaign with radio right now, where a radio promoter friend of mine is sending his music out to radio stations, and so far the response has been incredible.
Mhm.
And but we can't chart down there until he meets certain requirements, and one of them is he either lives in the state or a surrounding state, and he plays 30% of his shows in the
Mhm.
state of Texas.
Yeah, you have to
We're
have a
not
presence here somehow, somewhat.
we're not there, but we're going to get there. And
Yeah,
so that's a challenge I've taken on. A lot of people might go, "Well, I'm not going to take that on. I can't." He's not working in Texas. He's not established there. But it's not the first time that I've broken act in Texas. So
that's right. Hey, Jake
I'll
Flint,
do it.
right? Jake Flint broke in Texas.
And he did, yes.
Mhm.
And so did a bunch of other acts I've worked with. But I'll do it again. I know I will. And so I'm working with that. I'm working PR for some great artists right now. I'm also running. I do publicity for Triumph Publicity, which is a division of CDX Records. I handle the operations of their publishing company as their publicist. And so I've got some great artists under that roster that I work with. And then, artists of my own. And I'm always on the lookout for, oh, and then I manage a black mother daughter duo named Honeyfire. And
Awesome.
they're
Awesome.
now, they're right now, I'm sorry.
I said they are incredible. Absolutely
Oh, thank
incredible.
you.
Yes.
I met them by sheer accident. A friend of mine, of all things, is a burlesque dancer,
Nice.
and the mother in the group works on cruise ships, and she was on a stop in Skagway, Alaska, and met my friend Cooper Lynn Hayes. Um, sh she was telling Cooper about her duo with her daughter, and she said, "Are you working in Nashville?" I said, "Yeah, we write there." And she said, "Do you have a manager?" And said, "No, we're looking." And she said, "Wait a minute." And she texted me and said, "Hey, I'm sitting here with this lady. They are an amazing talent. Would you take a phone call?" And I'm like, "Well, if you say they're good, they're good." So
Mm,
yes. So later that day, Chesa, the mother, called me, and after that phone call, I became very shortly after that became their manager.
amazing.
And we're releasing music. And right now, the daughter in the group, Mariana, she is pregnant and expecting in August. So right now, we're kind of low key. We're getting ready to come with their next single, and hopefully, once the baby calms and things kind of stabilize a little bit to where they can perform, we're going to be bringing them out to Nashville and starting to make some waves out here. We're already making waves, but we're going to turn that into a bigger splash.
Good stuff, man. I'll tell you one thing I really love to see is how much passion is still in your face after 40 plus years on the industry side of music. You're still so passionate and it still tickles you to death. I love to see that.
Well, I hope I never lose that. I think if I lose that, then I don't need to be doing this anymore.
Right, right.
The day that I'm not on fire, I have a saying that I've had for a long time. It's I wake up every day on fire thinking this could be the day that changes the rest of my life.
Man,
When I stop feeling that way, I don't need to do this anymore
I hear you.
because I
Cliff,
really always believe that next phone call is going to change my life. This interview right here, somebody's going to see this interview and they're going to want to work with me because of the kind words you've bestowed on me and about whatever I've said here. There's likely going to be somebody out there that's going to see this that's going to work with me. I don't know who that might be, but I stay open for the opportunity.
Cliff, thank you so much for who you are and for spending some time with me today. It's just been a huge honor for me, not only to be your friend, but to be able to bring these stories to the world in any small way that I can. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chris. I'm very grateful for being on your show. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Man, what a honor it is was to talk to Clif Doyal. I'm a man who has worn many, many hats over his illustrious career in the music industry. Again, I can't thank you enough, Cliff, for spending some time this afternoon. I hope you guys really got something informative about this episode. There's a lot to learn if you're an artist out there, or even if you're a behind the scenes person out there that wants to know more about how the music industry works. I know personally speaking, I learned a whole lot during the show, and I'm excited to implement some of the things that I've learned by talking to Cliff in the future. And I hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you did, you can, of course, follow if you're on Spotify, subscribe if you're on YouTube. Both of those are completely free. And of course, if you'd like some sponsorship, you can contact me at thebostonchrisshow at gmail.com if you'd like that. No big deal if you don't. That's cool. I hope you enjoyed the show. Again, like, comment, ring the notify bell. I'll see you again next week with another awesome episode of the 10 Minutes with Boston Chris podcast. Thanks for tuning in.